Okay, thank you. Here we go. This looks better. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that.
Emily says you have a lovely face too.
Thank you. And actually, it was probably better for that introduction for you to see me and not all the text. But so the Talmud is. Thank you, Rachel. The Talmud's talking about labor that you can do on the intermediate days of the festival. As you might know, on Passover and Sukkot, the first days of the holiday and at the end days of the holiday are Yom Tov that have Shabbat-like restrictions for what we can do, with some exceptions for cooking. But in the intermediate days, we're allowed to do a little more work, although we're supposed to refrain from some work because it's still a holiday. And finding that balance is a lot of what Moed Katan is about. And here we see a machloket, a difference of opinion about a particular kind of work between Shmuel and Rav Dimi, two rabbis of the Talmud. So Shmuel says, one may seal a jug with pitch, but one may not seal a barrel with pitch during the intermediate days of the holiday. And Rav Dimi says, in fact, the opposite. One may seal a barrel with pitch, and one may not seal a small jug with pitch. Now, this already in and of itself is a typical moment in the Talmud where two rabbis have a completely opposite opinion about a particular practice. Here, one says that you can use pitch to close off, seal a jug, a small vessel, but not a barrel, a larger container. And Rav Dimi, the second sage, says the opposite. You can seal a large barrel, but not a small one. Oftentimes, the first level of conversation in the Gemara is just this. We hear two opinions about practice. They are different, and all we know is the rabbis' names and what they want us to do. And that's where we get to the next layer of the Talmud, which are the next two lines. Here also, in this sugya, very short, that adds a little color to this conversation. This sage, says the Talmud, meaning Shmuel, the first one, was concerned about financial loss. And this sage, meaning Rav Dimi, was concerned about unnecessary exertion. And what does the Gemara add here? It adds reasons why the two rabbis have different opinions about what to do with these containers and sealing them. Shmuel was concerned about that we protect ourselves from financial loss on the intermediate days of the holiday. And his approach was, you're not supposed to work, but if you're at risk of losing a lot of money, we make an exception, allow you to do some work. And that's why he allows you to seal a barrel. I'm sorry, I mixed up the order. Who's allowed to seal the barrel? This is Rav Dimi. You could seal the barrel. Rav Dimi says you could seal a barrel because he's concerned about financial loss. And why is that? Because if you don't seal a barrel, you could potentially have whatever large quantity of things are in the barrel spoil, and you'll lose them, and there'll be a lot of you lose a lot of money, and that's why you can work to seal that barrel. The other sage who allows you to seal a small jug but not a barrel, Shmuel, is concerned about how much effort it takes you to do the work. Meaning, if the intermediate days of the holiday are still a holiday, and we're supposed to celebrate and be joyful and rest from our ordinary labor, we can do a little bit of labor, but not a lot of labor. And so that's why the second sage says, you could seal a small jug with pitch that only takes a little bit of effort, and not a larger barrel, which takes a lot of effort. Here's what happens in these four short lines. First, we hear the two opinions about this law about what work you could do. We don't know much about why they have a difference of opinion. We just know that they rule differently and that they rule in a completely opposite way. A later layer of the conversation is put on top of it, where the Gemara tells us what's the reasons behind the two rabbis and why do they land in a different place about practice. And we see that their difference of opinion is about each had a different factor that influenced their decision. And in some ways, almost every halachic sugya, almost every bit of our argumentation that we have in the Talmud about a matter of halakha where there's a disagreement is structured like this. Sometimes we know they're much lengthier and they can go on for pages and pages and pages, but often this is really what the Gemara is trying to work out. We have two opinions from two different rabbis about what we do, and we're trying to figure out why do they have different opinions so that we can understand the rules. And the Gemara is trying to dig into their opinions and uncover what motivates each sage to land somewhere differently about practice by attributing different legalistic thinking or different values and imposing them upon their views. So here we see if during a holiday you're concerned about protecting people from financial loss, you'll make exceptions about to allow them to work when the loss is great. But if you're concerned mostly about making sure people celebrate the holiday and rest from labor, you're going to make exceptions only when there's a small amount of work, because we don't want people to exert themselves too much, which will interfere with their celebration of the holiday. And based on what your motivation, based on your reasoning, you're going to land in a different place about what the law is. So we see both the disagreement about actual practice, that here the Gemara tells us is a disagreement that's rooted in understanding of the limits of work during the holiday, or different concerns about what we should be thinking about when we think about what work we can do during Chol Moed. And because of that, they land in different places. If you're reading Daf Yomi, which I know from reading Daf Yomi, the pace is really fast, you will see many sugyot over the course of the next 5 years that have a structure just like this. 2 short statements about law, followed by 2 short explanations about the concerns of the person who gave their opinion about the law. And if you unpack it the same way that we just unpacked this, it will help you get a sense of like what's going on in these sugyot. And so what I love about this really short set of 4 lines is the way it's typical of so many conversations that we'll see. And if you're looking for this structure as you read, you'll uncover many, many sugyot that follow exactly this pattern and be able to see how the Gemara builds its conversation. And when the conversation goes longer and takes half a page or sometimes 4 pages, sometimes you could see how a small conversation that starts with these 4 lines can actually be dragged out, where we could dig deeper into what's the difference between financial loss and unnecessary exertion. Does it make a difference? Are there cases when we would really rule different ways besides the barrel and the jug? Are there cases where the difference of opinion doesn't matter at all? That would be the next layer. In this particular conversation that we saw earlier in the week, the rabbis didn't go there, but sometimes, as we know, when we go from 4 lines to a 2-page conversation, it's questions like that keep digging, that keeps the Gemara digging into the opinions and expanding their discourse on any particular topic. All right, so that's topic number 1 today. I'm going to jump ahead. Topic number 2. I'm getting a hand. So, my friend and colleague, Pamela Gottfried. Can we unmute Pamela to?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Pamela.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, it's an accident. I'm on my phone in a parking lot, and I was trying to turn off the live transcript. But,
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye,
Thanks
Pam.
for the shout out, Elliot.
Okay, terrific. All right, well, there you go. I had my own technical issue with my screen sharing today, so we're even, Pamela. Thanks for joining us from the parking lot. All right, Stephen, do you want to chime in? Your hand's up.
Yes, I would propose a second explanation for Rav Dimi, and that is that the community may be adversely affected if all the stuff in the barrel is lost. But if only the contents of the small jug is affected, then you have only affected yourself and not the community.
Excellent. Stephen, I really appreciate that comment and would say, had you been around the Beit Midrash, 1,700 years ago, it might say next, Stephen disagrees and says actually Rav Dimi's reason is something else, which is concern about the community, right? The community, in theory, needs what's in the barrels. And if we lose those resources, it affects the community as a whole. That's, as we would say, excellent. You have a Gemara cup, Stephen. That's excellent Gemara reasoning. And what I like about your comment is it shows how, right, the Gemara is just the beginning of the conversation. You could take the conversation that's happening in the Gemara and always build on it, right? It's the Gemara, while sometimes it feels like it exhausts every possibility, it doesn't exhaust every possibility. And Stephen has just shown us how. Janine, you want to jump in?
This is a very technical question. Maybe it's very basic. You seem to imply that the first two sentences, just the last two sentences, were from the Gemara. It seems like it's all from the Gemara, because it deals with these different people who were, kind of later in time.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that. That it is technical, but I'm glad you said this because it lets me be more specific about my seats. Right, this is all a conversation in the Gemara.
Okay.
So that is true. And while the Talmud, right, has layers, there's the Mishnah, right, which is an earlier text, and the Gemara, which is a later text. Within each of the texts, there are also layers. So this particular conversation, and many in the Gemara, starts with two quotes from earlier sages that are named, and then is followed by an explanation by an anonymous text. And the wisdom of from the academy, right? Those who study the academic study of Talmud have come to teach us that the first two lines of this conversation are earlier, and the second two lines from this conversation are later. And we actually see we see the building of a conversation of a Gemara over centuries, right? Because the text of the Gemara came together over a long time. And that at some point, the texts that the rabbis and the Beit Midrash were studying were just the two opinions of Shmuel and Rav Dimi. And ultimately, as their opinions were discussed, the reasons and their motivations for deciding what they did, there became a consensus about it, and then those opinions were added to the discussion in the text. And so when I said Gemara, I meant the anonymous Gemara as opposed to the named sages in the first lines. Right, this text also showcases for us the layers of the conversation. Sometimes it reads like everyone's in the same place at the same time, and this conversation happened on one afternoon. But probably this conversation that has been preserved for us in these 4 lines of text happened over a number of generations. All right. Thanks, Janine, for the question. I see the clock is running.
Yeah.
On page 12. So
This good conversation is all balanced. Go ahead.
It is true. And I would say if we only did this text, that would be fine too. But I brought a second one. And to change the pace a little bit, it's a story time. The next text I'm going to bring as a story. I'll flip the slide in a second. Especially since we focus here on a legal text, I wanted to contrast that with some of the stories. And there's some really good narratives in Moed Katan. This is one of them. So if the first one is about how law comes together, I think the story is about many things. But for me today, it's about how actually things get put into practice. So here's the story. Too many slides went. Reish Lakish, a scholar in the Gemara, was guarding an orchard for payment when a certain man came and ate some figs that were growing there. An important detail that we're not going to learn for a couple of years in Daf Yomi, the fact that Reish Lakish was guarding the orchard for payment makes him responsible financially for any loss that happens while the orchard is under his authority. So when a certain man, an anonymous person, comes and eats some figs there, that's a problem for Reish Lakish because he's actually responsible for the loss of produce to the owner of the orchard who hired him to guard it. So what does Reish Lakish do? Reish Lakish raised his voice and yelled at him. But this man paid no attention to him and kept eating. And Reish Lakish said, let this man be in a state of excommunication. We turn this week in Moed Katan from our conversation about mourning, about work on the holidays, to a conversation about mourning, to a conversation about excommunication. And Reish Lakish uses the rabbinic power to impose a short-term excommunication on the person who invaded the orchard that he was in charge of guarding, ate a fig, and after being chased away verbally, refused to leave and ate more figs. And Reish Lakish said, that's it for this violation. and perhaps because you're putting me under financial distress, and you will be excommunicated for your improper behavior. So the man eating figs knows his Jewish law and says back, on the contrary, let that man, meaning Reish Lakish, be in a state of excommunication. For even if I have become liable to you for payment, as I have eaten the figs without permission, have I become liable to you for excommunication? The implication of that rhetorical question is no. And with that statement, the man left. So what happens? The man says, oh, well, I might owe Reish Lakish money because I ate figs without permission. And if he's responsible to pay the owner, since I ate the figs, I'm really on the hook for the money and owe Reish Lakish the money. But in excommunicating for me for this, Reish Lakish has gone too far. And what does the man do? He knows his rules. If you excommunicate someone who doesn't merit excommunication, you yourself can be excommunicated. So the fig-eating man turns the tables on Reish Lakish and says, I'm going to excommunicate you, and then walks off the stage. And his part is only in the first act. When we go to the second act, Reish Lakish goes to the Beit Midrash, to the study hall, to ask about the halacha. What happens here? I just tried to excommunicate somebody, and I was excommunicated back. What really should happen? And the other sages say to Reish Lakish, this decree of ostracism is valid, but your decree of ostracism is not. So Reish Lakish's peers in the Beit Midrash uphold the man's work and actually show that Reish Lakish was wrong to excommunicate the fig-eating man, and the fig-eating man was right to excommunicate Reish Lakish back. And now Reish Lakish is stuck because he will have to leave the community for a short amount of time. What happens in Act 3? What's the remedy? Asked the Gemara, or maybe Reish Lakish. And the response is, well, you go to the person to release you from the excommunication that they placed upon you. And Reish Lakish says, I do not know him. This is some random fig-eating man. I don't know him. I don't know where to go. What can I do? Is there a way for me to get out of this excommunication that I fell into? And the sages say, go to the Nasi so that he may release you, as it is taught. Oh, sorry, there's a T missing. If one was ostracized, but he does not know who ostracized him, he goes to the Nasi. The Nasi is the presiding rabbi over the courts, and the Nasi may release him from the decree of ostracism. So while Reish Lakish can't go to the person who sent him out of the community to get released, he can appeal to the highest authority in the courts to do that. What I love about this story is it takes it's a story about excommunication, which is the topic of a number of our pages this week, and shows, one, that while the rabbis are talking about many of the pages this week, what are the rules about when and how you can put someone you can ostracize someone, you can excommunicate someone. We see a potential abuse of that power as Reish Lakish uses his power to excommunicate somebody in a situation where he's not supposed to. We see a great reversal where just a fig-eating passerby also can take on the power to excommunicate back when unjustly excommunicated. And we see this piece of Reish Lakish tries to figure out, how can I get out of it if I'm stuck and I can't go to the person who excommunicated to get out of it? And he can get to the Nasi and do that. And I sometimes wonder, as I read this story, Reish Lakish can get out of the excommunication by going to the Nasi, but if his excommunication of the fig eater had been upheld, I wonder if the fig-eating common person could have that same access to the Nasi to appeal the excommunication. For me, this story raises a lot of questions about, power and decision-making and who gets to actually preside over excommunications. We see a common person excommunicating a rabbi, but then we see, who has access to the ultimate authority to overturn that. Anyways, that's a little story from today's text. There's a whole series of stories about excommunication around page 17 where this is. You might want to look for others as well. And Leah, you have a question. Rachel, can we unmute Leah?
Yeah, I gave her unmuting powers.
Oh,
Okay,
Leah, you can
Give her a
unmute.
sec.
Got it. Okay. the question comes to mind. Supposing the fig stealer had instead shaken the tree, some figs had fallen down, would he have been more within his rights because of the rule of Peah, leaving whatever falls? Could he have gotten along? Would that have been a better way for him to have gone about getting his figs?
Ah, got it. So that's a great question and comes from, right, a Masachet Peah, which talks about some of this, right? People who need food do have the rights to certain parts of the crops in just an ordinary field. Right? Farmers are supposed to, landowners are supposed to leave the corners unharvested so that people can take them. Food product that drops in the harvesting process is supposed to be left that people can just take. I think in your question is if he intentionally shook the tree so that some figs fell on the ground for him to then take, since he was the tree shaker, I don't think that helps him get it.
Too bad.
Too bad, right? There are also some rules about, like, if you're just walking by like a fruit tree and you take one piece of fruit from it, is that considered theft? So there is plenty of Talmudic material to investigate, was it really wrong to eat one fig? But I think since she was shooed away by the security guard, Reish Lakish, and he went back and took another one, right? By property laws and by the rabbinic laws, the fact that he was warned and he did it again makes a big difference. So thank you for that question. We'll have more about property laws coming soon.
Rabbi
Yes,
Goldberg, before we go to more questions, we've got a couple of basic comprehension things in the chat. We have a couple of questions. First is about the difference between cherem, excommunication, and nidui, ostracism. What are the differences between those two? And I will just say now, I sometimes get confused about what day it is, but if it hasn't come out already yet, we do have a Daily Dose piece that is going to go in depth on that. But I just wanted to let you know, Rabbi Goldberg,
tomorrow.
People are asking. It might be tomorrow. I'm not sure, folks.
I think that might be, it was either yesterday or tomorrow. I'm with you on that. I'm not sure which day.
There are a couple pages in a row about this coming right up. And then we also have a question about the difference between a Nasi and a Nazarite. I think there's some confusion because the auto transcript at the bottom is consistently rendering Nasi as Nazi. Right? So just add confusion. So would you just answer those real quickly for us, and then we'll go back to the raised hands.
Shout out to my friend and colleague Sarah Ben-Or, who works with the Jewish Language Project, that's trying to get the automatic transcriptions to take Jewish English, so that when you say words in Hebrew in a video like this, it gets transliterated in the closed captioning the way we want it to. That's a different piece. All right, so I'll take that second one. Nasi is a president, meaning the president is a word for president. Like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is a figure in the Mishnah, and that's a rabbinic position of leadership in the Jewish hierarchy of things. And Nasi is really the head of the rabbinic court and the main decider about Jewish law. And a Nazarite is a person who takes a vow to abstain from a particular behavior or particular food for a short period of time. We will soon, but it's still out there. Maybe it could be, there's a whole masachet about Nazarites that we'll learn about more. And Nasi here, we know Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who comes up a lot in the Talmud, right? He was, right, the president, and we've met others, and so that was what that term means here. I'm glad someone asked about ostracism and excommunication, because I found, while there are key terms about that, right, in the Hebrew, in this particular passage that I picked, right, there's a lot of Aramaic in the Talmud, and the English translation isn't always consistent with the Aramaic words. And I find with all the different languages we're dealing with on Daf Yomi, sometimes there is a lack of precision. But there are two levels by which you can be sent away from the community. A lower level ostracism that sends you out for a term of minimally 30 days, potentially more, that you can appeal to the person who ostracized you to let you back in. And it has a temporary status that sometimes is connected to you making you making some sort of recompense right, compensation or doing something to correct wrong behavior, some sort of apology or some sort of change. And then there's excommunication that's can be a lifetime ban, where you're sent away, never allowed to come back. The Gemara deals with both of these cases in these pages. And actually, I'm seeing that we're reaching to our last minute. I always feel bad because there are so many great questions, but I want to do the sneak peek because soon we're going to be, the next Masachet is Masachet Chagiga that's coming. And Masachet Chagiga has a lot of narrative about one of the few rabbinic characters who we have extensive stories about how they were excommunicated and sent out of the community. And I wanted to mention that as a sneak peek because next week, in a text that you wouldn't know if you didn't notice, we see mention of Elisha ben Abuya, who is this character. The text I just put on the screen is just a simple story about if you hear about the death of a relative years after it happens, what your mourning obligations are. And this text just says, right, there's an incident where the father of Rabbi Tzadok died in the city of Ginzak, and they informed him, meaning Rabbi Tzadok, of his father's passing 3 years later. So set aside the pastoral moment that Rabbi Tzadok needs some comfort because it's been 3 years since his father died and he did not know. But he came to ask Elisha ben Abuya and the elders with him what he should do, what should be his practice. And Elisha ben Abuya says, observe the rites of mourning for 7 and 30 days. Take on the standard mourning practices, even though it's been 3 years since your father died. Since you just heard about it, you should mourn now. And I bring this today because next week when we read this short passage, you might not note that Elisha ben Abuya is anybody special. It happens that he's someone who this issue of excommunication is important about. And what I really wanted people to note next week when you see this text is it's just a regular mention of Elisha ben Abuya, who's with the elders of a city ruling on a matter of halacha, of Jewish law, showing him part of the rabbinic community. The complexities of his story and all the details of his biography don't show up here. And I want you to have this text in mind that doesn't refer to any of the stories that we're going to read in the next Masachet that we study. You should know that those stories have become, right there, they become famous in the world of people who read rabbinic stories. There's lots of being written about them, and I hope you will enjoy reading about them as well. But here's just a regular old mention of Elisha ben Abuya, just ruling about Jewish law in the midst of a conversation about mourning rituals. And if I didn't flag it, I have a post-it in my Talmud for the, because I found I flagged it now. If you didn't know to flag it now, you wouldn't think maybe to look back at it after you read the stories that are coming in the next month. Anyways, I think I exhausted my last minute and I stole an extra minute from everybody with that.
Rabbi Goldberg, if you're willing for 2 more minutes, there's one question from Carol Friedman we didn't get to earlier.
Yes, I'm happy to stay. I'm always feel bad about keeping people on beyond, but I guess everyone has that free right to, if you need to go, if you want to stay, great. If you need to know, you can go. Carol,
okay.
Please.
Thank you so much for the sneak peek there. Let's not leave Carol hanging and give her a chance to ask her question.
Go ahead, Carol.
For this lesson. Yep. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the lesson. I have a question, a general question regarding your first teaching. I've noticed in this Masachet that there's more leniency or more debate about any of these particular issues relating to practice during the Chol HaMoed. And I wonder if you think the leniency encouraged more adherence, more practice, because there was more room in how to interpret the halacha, or if you feel it had the opposite effect because it seemed more arbitrary. Thank you.
All right. Interesting. Thank you, Carol, for your question. There was a little static, so I'm going to repeat it, and I hope I got it close. You noticed, and correctly so, that there seems to be a more leniency in this Masachet than we've seen in other Masachet that talk about observance of holidays and things. In fact, in the conversation, subcategory of conversations about mourning, mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I, right? The Talmud says on matters of mourning we're lenient, right? There's some statements about where the rabbis in their discussions say they're intentionally lenient here about some of these things. But Carol, your question was about, do I think that the leniency helped people celebrate, right? And that's something to think about, and the rabbis do too. If we're too strict and the people can't stand by the rules, will we lose them and their practice? And if we're more lenient, will that get more people to participate? So I'm not sure sociologically what the impact was in the centuries in which the rabbis were, here with us and more in control, the rabbis of the Talmud. But I do think there's a practical reason for this, right? For this Masechah that's talking about the observance of the week-long holidays of Passover and Sukkot and the intermediate days, I know the difficulty that there would be, right, abstaining completely from labor, for a week-long holiday. Because while a day or two, right, a day of Shabbat or 2 days of a holiday, or as we have in the diaspora, 2 days of a holiday that leads into Shabbat, sometimes we have 3 days, of Yom Tov in a row. It can be challenging to set everything aside for that many days. And I think the rabbis really recognize that in a holiday that's a week long, that have middle days for which the rules are not as tight, that we had to leave room for people and their regular life. Right, the verses of the Torah supported them in that decision making, but I think the leniency was really out of practicality in that, especially in the society, an agrarian society in which people live, that if you didn't move your crops forward and you lost them, you could literally starve to death as a result of that. And we need some leniency for that. And in fact, that's become true about Chol HaMoed in many communities around the world, right, in the diaspora and in Israel. Chol HaMoed looks much more like a regular workday than it does the holiday days that precede and are after that. Right, on Passover, we still eat matzah and refrain from eating bread, and on Sukkot, we still use our sukkah and our lulav and etrog. But during Chol HaMoed, I would say most observant people treat Chol HaMoed more like a regular workday than they do a holiday day. I think we've become more lenient over time. And some of that is, I think, about, it's hard to do a whole week in Yom Tov zone. And if you want to enjoy the holiday, you need both kinds of, both the days that are a little more of a pause from regular routine, and some days where you can still take care of regular stuff. Anyways, Carol, I hope that answers your question. Really appreciate everyone who is here today. I see familiar faces from these classes and familiar faces from other corners of my life, and lots of new faces. I'm so impressed at the numbers of people who are finding ways to commit to Daf Yomi and all the different ways we can study it. And so thankful to My Jewish Learning for being a host to and a pioneer in the Daf Yomi space. So it's a pleasure to be a part of this.
Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful discussion, for great comments, for great questions. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for picking wonderful texts to review with us today. And we're going to call it here. We'll see you all soon. Bye, everyone.
Take care, everybody.